Don't sign that contract.
The shout pierces the silence like a thunderclap, making every head in the boardroom snap toward the doorway.
What happens next will shock you.
The air, once thick with tension over billion-dollar negotiations, now crackles with something far more volatile: shock. Maya stands there, frozen in the doorway, her dark green housekeeping uniform neatly pressed, her chest rising and falling with nervous breath. The conference room, perched high above Manhattan in the Walker MedTech Tower, has never felt so still.
It's as though time has been knocked off its axis.
A flurry of whispers erupts like wind sweeping through dry leaves.
Who is that? What the hell is going on?
She just interrupted a corporate merger.
All eyes narrow on Maya.
Dozens of sharp tailored suits stare her down with thinly veiled contempt or stunned confusion, but none more piercing than the man at the head of the table. John Walker, CEO, billionaire, and empire builder, glares at her as though she has just thrown ink across the Mona Lisa. His steel gray eyes are wide with fury, his lips curled into disbelief. Then his voice booms across the oak-paneled room. "There's no work for you here, Maya," he barks, slamming his pen onto the table. His voice echoes off the glass and mahogany walls, bouncing with authority and anger.
Several executives flinch. Maya doesn't move.
Her voice has gone silent, but her eyes hold firm. There's a flicker of something behind her composure: urgency, maybe even fear, but it stands against the wall of disdain now rising around her. John rises from his chair slowly, shoulders taut with disbelief.
"This is a private negotiation. You are out of line."
"I know I am, sir," Maya replies, her tone remarkably steady, "but I wouldn't be here if it weren't life or death."
The murmurs swell again. One of Edgewell Biotech's lawyers, a man with slicked back hair and a plastic smile, scoffs. "This is outrageous, Mr. Walker. Do you want me to call security?"
But John holds up a hand. His jaw is clenched tight, but he doesn't repeat the command.
Instead, he narrows his gaze. "You have 10 seconds. Say what you need to say."
Maya takes a cautious step forward, reaches into her cleaning cart, and retrieves a flash drive tucked beneath a folded towel. She places it gently on the polished table in front of him.
"I found this last night. Mr. Redmond left his laptop open.
I wasn't looking for anything, but something felt wrong."
John's lips barely move. "You realize what you're implying, Maya?" "I do, sir." "And you think that gives you the right to interrupt this?"
"I think if you sign that contract, people will die," she says softly. The words land with a jolt. Even the most skeptical faces falter. John glances at the flash drive.
He doesn't touch it yet.
What's on there?
Internal reports, emails. Edgewell's been hiding defects in their biotech heart modules.
They've altered documents, buried deaths. "How would you even know how to read this?" he asks, biting the words. "I used to be a senior accountant in Atlanta," she says, not flinching.
"Until my husband got sick.
I left my job to care for him. After he passed, I couldn't keep the house. I took whatever work I could find, but I didn't forget how to spot a lie in a spreadsheet."
A stunned silence falls once more.
John finally picks up the drive and plugs it into his laptop, more out of instinct than belief.
The screen glows to life. Documents open. Charts, internal memos, a PDF labeled confidential. Internal risk assessment. And then he sees it, redacted. Incident reports. 3 failures noted. 2 deaths linked to malfunctioning implants. An email from Gerald Kane, Edgewell's CEO, instructing staff to keep sensitive findings internal until post-merger. John's knuckles turn white as he grips the table edge. Across the room, no one breathes. Outside, Paul Ramsey peeks in.
"Sir, they're asking if this delay is procedural."
"It's over," John says, voice like iron. "Excuse me, the deal. It's dead. Cancel everything."
"But, Mr. Walker," I said, "cancel it," he snaps.
Paul nods and disappears. John stares at Maya.
His anger hasn't vanished, but now it churns with something else: comprehension. "You could have just walked away," he says. My husband was on a list for a device like that, Mia whispers.
He died waiting. Now they're pushing faulty ones on people who are desperate. I couldn't just stay quiet.
If you felt a connection with Maya's courage, go ahead and like this video from BUP Stories and tell us in the comments where you're watching from.
Who knows? Someone nearby might be watching this with you, too. John leans back, silence ringing between them.
You just made some very powerful enemies, he mutters.
Mia's hands tremble slightly, but her eyes don't.
I've faced worse. For the first time that day, John gives the hint of a nod. He looks back at his screen and then toward the window. The city buzzes below, unaware that somewhere in a quiet boardroom, someone has chosen truth over billions and someone else has risked everything to speak it.
John Walker didn't sleep that night. He sat alone in his office at the top floor of Walker MedTech Tower. The soft golden light of the desk lamp casting long shadows on the polished walnut walls.
The city pulsed beneath him, horns, lights, sirens.
But up here, it was silent, too silent. On his screen, the files from Maya's flash drive remained open.
Internal reports, suppressed emails, incident logs that spoke louder than any press release ever could. What he saw wasn't just unethical, it was dangerous, lethal. They had almost signed a deal with the devil, and it took a housekeeper to show him the smoke behind the mirror. He picked up the phone and dialed a number from memory.
Paul, assemble the internal investigation team. 6 a.m. sharp.
There was a pause. Yes, sir, came the groggy voice of Paul Ramsey, general counsel.
John hung up and turned back to the city lights.
He thought about the woman he barely knew, always polite, always invisible until yesterday. And now her voice was the only thing he could hear.
Maya.
That name hadn't left his mind since she spoke up. She didn't just bring him evidence.
She brought him a lifeline.
At sunrise, the emergency meeting convened. Just a few trusted executives, Paul, Linda Harris from finance, and Charles Green from compliance.
No suits from Edgewell, no investors. John got straight to the point.
We were seconds away from signing a deal that could have cost lives.
I want the truth.
No filters, no boardroom diplomacy.
Linda opened her laptop. I've reviewed the documents from Maya's drive.
The numbers match patterns we flagged months ago, but Edgewell dismissed them. They assured us our audit team had outdated models. Charles nodded gravely.
Edgewell maintained dual audit trails.
What they presented to us was sanitized, but the internal documents tell a very different story. One of cover-ups, manipulated performance data, and 3 deaths tied directly to their devices. Paul added, if this is accurate, and I believe it is, we're looking at not just civil liability, but potential criminal charges. Had we signed, Walker MedTech would be liable for fraud by association.
John leaned back, rubbing his temples. Maya Harris risked everything by coming forward. She didn't owe us that. We owe her protection.
She's still on the 3rd floor working her shift.
Paul said, we haven't made anything public yet.
Keep it that way, but assign discreet security to her.
If Edgewell suspects she's the whistleblower, they all nodded grimly.
And I want to speak to her tonight, John said.
That evening, Maya was escorted quietly into John's office.
She looked composed, but wary, as if the polished walls and leather chairs weren't built for people like her. Her uniform was clean, her hands folded neatly. John gestured to the chair across from him.
Would you like some tea? Maya smiled faintly.
I usually just serve it, sir.
Never get offered. He didn't argue.
Thank you, he said plainly. For your courage.
You didn't just protect this company. You may have saved lives.
Not just lives, sir, she said. Futures, fathers, mothers, veterans, people who trust devices to keep them alive. Your husband, John paused. You mentioned he died waiting. She nodded, eyes glistening. He was on a waiting list for a cardiac device.
The insurance wouldn't approve it.
Said he didn't meet the criteria.
He was 48. By the time the appeal went through, it was too late.
John sat with the weight of her story,
the air between them thick with truths left unsaid.
"You realize," he said slowly, "there are people who will see you as a threat now." "Truth is only dangerous to liars," Maya replied, her voice calm.
"The real danger is silence."
He smiled slightly.
For a moment, the office didn't feel like a fortress. It felt human.
"I want to offer you a different job," he said.
Maya raised an eyebrow. "What kind of job? Advisory, ethics board?"
"You saw what no one else did. Or maybe you were just the only one brave enough to speak." She tilted her head.
"I'll consider it. No rush. Just know we need people like you."
They shook hands. His grip was firm. Hers was steady.
Two worlds, one shared line of principle. As Maya exited the office, John remained at his desk, staring at the flash drive.
"Numbers don't lie," he whispered.
"But people choose what they see." That night, he drafted a company-wide memo titled Official Statement.
Walker MedTech postpones merger pending federal review. And just beneath the heading, he added one line.
"This company will not move forward if truth is left behind." It wasn't just a business decision.
It was a declaration, a new beginning.
By the time the sun rose over Manhattan the next morning, the fallout had already begun.
John Walker stood on the rooftop terrace of Walker MedTech, a steaming mug of black coffee in his hand, his eyes fixed on the skyline. It was the same view he'd seen every day for years. Yet somehow, after Maya, after the flash drive, after the decision to halt the merger, everything looked different.
The city didn't feel like a fortress anymore. It felt like a battlefield. Inside the building, news was spreading fast. "What do you mean the merger's suspended?" A vice president barked into his phone, pacing the hallway.
"Who the hell leaked this to the press?" demanded another.
Emails poured in, investors, board members, even government regulators, all demanding answers. But John was silent. He didn't rush to the press. He didn't issue reassurances. He waited.
Waited for the moment when he could control the narrative with truth, not spin.
Downstairs in the internal audit room, a war room had been set up.
Charles Green led the task force, combing through every line of data from Edgewell. By midday, they had confirmed not just 3, but 5 serious incidents related to the heart devices, all covered up. Linda Harris approached John later that afternoon, her tablet in hand. "We found a chain of emails between Edgewell's legal team and their marketing division. They were strategizing how to sell around the defects, language like reframe risk perception and preemptive PR modeling."
"It's damning." John didn't blink. "Package it. Everything. We're sending it to the FDA and the Justice Department tonight."
She nodded, impressed by the steadiness in his voice.
"You're really going all the way with this?"
"I'm not burning bridges," he said.
"I'm burning a rotten foundation." Meanwhile, Maya had returned to her usual routine.
Despite John's offer and her growing involvement in the unfolding investigation, she insisted on finishing her cleaning shifts. "Work calms me," she told Paul Ramsey with a small shrug.
But not everyone was pleased. That evening, as she left the building through the service entrance, a black SUV crept slowly along the curb.
Its tinted windows rolled down just enough for a man in a dark suit to speak.
"You're making waves, Miss Harris. That's dangerous." Maya didn't stop walking.
So is lying about technology that kills people. The SUV didn't follow her, but its presence lingered like a shadow.
Back in his office, John prepared for what would be his most consequential board meeting to date.
He knew many on the board were furious. The merger had promised enormous profits.
Walking away wasn't just an ethical decision.
It was a financial grenade.
The meeting began in icy silence.
George Matt, a longtime board member with a stake in Edgewell stock, was the first to speak. "John, with all due respect, you're gambling this company's future on the word of a janitor."
John didn't flinch.
"I'm protecting its future by listening to someone who told the truth when no one else did."
"This isn't about ethics," another member snapped. "It's about fiduciary duty."
Our shareholders. Our shareholders don't want blood on their hands, John cut in.
And if they do, then we're in the wrong business. The room tensed.
John rose from his chair, pacing slowly as he spoke.
We've spent decades building trust. You know why our clients come to us?
Because they believe we care more about lives than margins.
That belief is the reason we exist.
If we sign that deal, we kill that trust and we invite lawsuits, press backlash, and frankly the collapse of everything we've built.
No one interrupted.
He stopped in front of the whiteboard and drew 2 lines. One labeled now, the other legacy.
I'm not asking you to like this decision. I'm asking you to remember why you joined this company in the first place.
We can survive a lost merger.
We cannot survive lost honor.
There was silence for a long beat, then one voice from the back.
I back him. Then another. Same here.
Eventually, a majority raised their hands.
The merger was officially terminated. When the boardroom emptied, John exhaled slowly, his shoulders sagging just slightly.
He looked out the window again, the same skyline, but now perhaps a cleaner conscience. That night, Maya sat in her modest apartment in Queens, a steaming bowl of gumbo on the table beside her. Her daughter curled up with a book nearby. Her phone buzzed with a message from Paul.
Merger's dead. You did it.
She stared at the words, then closed her eyes.
Outside, the city roared as usual. But somewhere in its heart, something had shifted.
Courage had spoken and power had listened.
3 days after the board vote, the headlines were everywhere.
Walker MedTech halts billion-dollar merger citing safety concerns.
Whistleblower janitor may have saved lives. Stalled corporate giant. Edgewell in crisis amid federal inquiry rumors.
John Walker sat in the backseat of a Blacktown car, the articles open on his tablet as the driver wove through downtown traffic. He should have felt vindicated, but instead there was a heaviness in his chest. The truth had been spoken, but truth, he knew, often came with a price. His phone buzzed.
John?
Paul Ramsey said on the other end.
We've got a problem. What now? There's been a breach attempt in the compliance database.
Someone tried to scrub the audit logs tied to the Edgewell files.
Fortunately, we caught it in time. We're locking down all internal systems. It's not just public fallout anymore. Someone's trying to cover their tracks. John's jaw clenched. Do we know who? We're tracing the IP. My gut says it's not external. It's someone inside.
John glanced out the window as they passed by Times Square. It glittered with motion, alive with ads and distractions, none of which mattered anymore. Send full logs to Charles and make sure Mia's protected.
She's the target now. Already done, Paul said. But John, there's something else. I think Edgewell's going to sue. John almost laughed. Let them. Discovery will expose everything they're still trying to hide.
But the tension in his chest tightened.
Retaliation didn't always come through courts.
It came through threats, manipulation, and fear.
Later that afternoon, Maya walked into the Walker MedTech employee lounge with a tray of coffee. Though she no longer had to clean floors, she hadn't shed her humility. Some nodded politely.
Others still looked at her with a mix of awe and confusion. She had become a symbol of a woman who stood up, who disrupted power.
And not everyone liked that. She stopped by Linda Harris's desk.
I heard what happened this morning, Maya said quietly.
The breach. Linda looked up, her expression tight. Someone's scared. They're scrambling to hide what can't be hidden anymore. Maya nodded. Be careful. You too, Linda replied, then added more softly. Some people still don't believe you belong in these rooms. That makes you dangerous in their eyes.
That night, as Maya stepped off the subway platform in Queens, she noticed a figure standing near the station exit. He wore a baseball cap pulled low, hands in his pockets, watching.
She walked briskly, keys clenched in her fist. The man didn't follow, but he didn't look away either.
When she got home, she locked the door behind her and pulled the curtains. Her daughter, Joy, looked up from the kitchen table.
"Everything okay, Mom?" Mia smiled faintly.
Just tired, but her heart was racing. She didn't tell Joy about the man or the quiet knocks at work or the car that had slowed behind her the night before. She had told the truth, but now the truth was watching her back. The next morning, John held a confidential meeting with Charles and Paul. "We need to take this federal," John said, "not just a report.
We hand-deliver every document to the Department of Justice and the FDA, and we bring Maya." Paul hesitated. "She's not staff. She's not even legal representation."
"She's the reason we're not a criminal accomplice right now," John snapped.
"She deserves to be there."
Charles spoke next.
"There's another complication. Gerald Kane, CEO of Edgewell, is lobbying aggressively. We've heard he's using connections to discredit Maya, digging into her past."
John slammed his hand on the table.
"If they want a war, they'll get one." "Oh." That evening, he called Maya into his office. "Do you trust me?" he asked. Maya sat straighter. "I trusted you when I handed you that flash drive." He smiled only a little. "Good, because we're going to Washington." 2 days later, Maya walked into the Department of Justice building for the first time in her life. She wore a simple gray blazer borrowed from Linda and held her head high.
Beside her, John Walker, flanked by attorneys and aides, strode with calm conviction.
They didn't come with press.
They came with evidence. For 3 hours, Maya answered questions, walked investigators through timelines, emails, and everything she saw and heard.
She didn't falter. She didn't dramatize. She just told the truth.
By the end, one federal agent leaned back and said, "Miss Harris, you may have just saved more lives than most of us do in a career."
Maya didn't smile.
"I didn't do it to be a hero," she said. "I did it so no one else would have to bury someone they love over a lie." Outside, as the wind swept down Constitution Avenue, John looked at her with quiet respect. "They'll come for us harder now," he said.
"They already did," she replied, then added.
"We're still standing," and indeed they were bruised, maybe watched, certainly, but standing and unafraid.
Maya returned to New York different. Not outwardly.
She still walked the same route home from the subway, still greeted the doorman at her building with the same nod, still brewed coffee in her old rattling pot. But something within her had shifted. Washington had asked for her truth, and she gave it fully without flinching. She didn't realize until after how much of her past she'd carried on her shoulders until she finally laid it down in that room of federal agents and prosecutors. At Walker Medtech, her presence no longer stirred whispers.
It drew quiet reverence.
Some employees now nodded to her in the hallway with respect, even a touch of awe. Linda had moved her into a temporary office, tucked between compliance and legal, where she helped organize testimony, translate financial trails, and review reports, most of which she deciphered faster than the junior analysts.
But not all eyes were kind.
Late one afternoon, as Maya was sorting emails in her small corner room, an envelope slid under her door.
No return address, just her name typed cleanly across the front. She hesitated, then opened it.
Inside was a single sheet of paper, 6 words printed in all caps.
"You should have stayed silent."
No signature, no indication of who sent it, but the message was unmistakable. She stared at the paper for a full minute, then calmly stood, walked to John Walker's office, and laid it on his desk. John read the note, then looked up at her.
"Is this the first?" Maya nodded.
"I didn't mention the car or the man at the subway." He leaned back in his chair, a muscle in his jaw twitching.
"They're scared." "They're desperate," she corrected. "There's a difference." Paul Ramsey was called in moments later. A full review of building security was launched. From that moment, Maya was assigned a dedicated security detail.
She protested briefly, but John wouldn't hear it. "This company won't let a woman face threats alone for doing the right thing," he said firmly.
Meanwhile, the pressure outside the company mounted. Edgewell went on the offensive.
First came the leak, anonymous tips to business outlets suggesting Mia had falsified documents, exaggerated claims, even hints that she'd once been arrested in Atlanta for financial misconduct.
None of it was true, but the damage was done. Headlines questioned her credibility. Op-eds wondered if this was a case of overreach.
Social media exploded in both directions. "I'm sorry, Miss Harris, but we'll have to postpone your community interview," the local news anchor said apologetically over the phone. "Our sponsors are uncomfortable." Mia sat quietly after the call, her hands folded in her lap. John stormed in minutes later, a printout of a hit piece from an online journal in his hand.
"This is garbage," he said, slamming the paper down. "They're trying to break you." She didn't raise her voice. "I expected it." "I didn't," John admitted.
"I thought truth would shield you."
Maya looked up, steady. "Truth is a shield, but it's also a sword. That's why it makes people nervous." He exhaled slowly. "We need to take control of the story."
Within 48 hours, Walker MedTech launched its own campaign, transparent, factual, and unapologetically supportive of Maya. They released full internal timelines, verified documents, and statements from doctors who had raised similar concerns about Edgewell's devices.
They didn't glorify Maya.
They told the story as it was. One woman saw something wrong and refused to let it stay hidden.
It worked. Public opinion began to turn.
Patients who had lost loved ones to failed devices stepped forward. Whistleblowers from other companies began contacting the DOJ. A congressional committee requested records. What started as a single voice had become a movement. Still, the threats didn't stop. One night, Maya returned home to find her apartment door slightly ajar. Nothing was taken, but on her kitchen table was a single glove, black leather, carefully placed, silent. She called the police. They investigated but found no prints. Her building had no security footage of anyone entering her floor. When John found out, he offered to move her to a corporate-owned apartment with security and cameras.
She declined. "If I run now," she said, "they win." He didn't argue.
But that night, he drove out to Queens himself and sat in his car across the street from her building for hours, just watching, just in case. The next morning, she found a note slipped into her office again, but this time it was different. Typed on the same paper, in the same bold font, were 8 words.
"You were right. They're hiding more. Trust no one."
She stared at it, heart racing. The tone wasn't threatening.
It was a warning. A second voice. She showed it to John immediately.
"We need to find out who this came from," he said.
"Someone inside," Maya said quietly. "Someone who knows more than we do."
A chill ran between them.
The battle wasn't over.
In fact, it was only beginning.
The second note changed everything. John Walker paced the length of his office, holding the slip of paper between his fingers like it was radioactive.
This changes the equation," he muttered.
"We've been thinking Edgewell was hiding past failures. But what if there's more, something ongoing? Current patients, current devices."
Maya sat across from him, calm but alert.
The note said, "Trust no one." That means whoever sent this believes someone inside Walker MedTech might be compromised, too. John stopped pacing. He hadn't considered that. Not truly.
"I'll have Paul start a silent background check on our leadership teams," he said.
"And I want building access logs cross-referenced with the timing of the notes."
Maya nodded, but her thoughts were elsewhere.
Something in the tone of that second note wasn't just a warning.
It was a plea, a breadcrumb from someone trapped inside the same system she had exposed. 2 days later, she received an internal email from a name she didn't recognize, e.smith@wimptel.net.
It was a single sentence.
"Meet me at the archive level after hours.
Come alone." She stared at it. No subject line, no introduction.
It felt both deliberate and rushed.
She printed the email, walked straight to John's office, and placed it before him.
"You're not going alone," he said immediately.
"I think I should," Maya replied. "Absolutely not. This person reached out to you." Not me. If we spook them, we may lose everything.
John looked at her.
Really?
Looked, then slowly nodded.
You'll wear a wire and a camera. Nothing visible.
We'll monitor everything from the surveillance room.
Paul and I will be watching in real time.
That night at 9:47 p.m., Maya stood before a steel-reinforced door marked B3 Archive. She wore a slim microphone tucked into her lapel and a button cam disguised as jewelry. Her heart pounded in her chest, not out of fear, but anticipation. The door creaked open. Inside, rows of filing cabinets and outdated tech blinked softly in the dim light. It smelled of coal dust and fluorescent fatigue. Then she saw him, a young man, barely 30, dressed in legal department attire, button-down shirt, badge clipped to his pocket. He looked nervous, twitchy, like a man standing at the edge of a cliff.
You came, he whispered. Maya kept her voice low. You're E. Smith? He nodded. Ethan. I'm a paralegal in contracts.
I don't have high clearance, but I see things, especially when they're meant to stay hidden.
What do you mean?
He glanced around, then handed her a manila folder. They never stopped shipping the defective models.
They renamed them.
Slight design tweaks, new labels, new lot numbers, but the flaws are still there.
Quiet cases are still coming in hospital reports that never get escalated. They're being rerouted through private settlements, non-disclosure agreements attached. Maya's breath caught. Patients are still getting hurt. He nodded. And worse.
In her ear, John's voice whispered through the wire.
Ask for names. Ask for copies. Can you prove it? Maya asked softly. Ethan pulled a flash drive from his jacket pocket. I copied emails, legal memos, scanned NDAs. I don't know how long I can stay unnoticed. Why come to me?
Because I heard what you did and I realized I was either going to be part of the machine or try to stop it.
Maya looked at him, this frightened, earnest man risking everything.
You're doing the right thing, Ethan, she said.
He almost smiled.
Then his face changed. A shadow moved behind the stacks of cabinets.
Someone's coming, he whispered urgently.
Mia turned, but the figure had already vanished.
Fast footsteps echoed down a side hall. John's voice crackled again. Maya, get out now. She and Ethan bolted toward the stairwell. They didn't wait for the elevator.
On the third floor, Ethan peeled off toward a different exit.
Maya slipped into a secured staff corridor, holding the flash drive tight in her palm.
Upstairs, John was already waiting at the security terminal. We got him on camera, Paul said, pointing to the shadowy figure.
But no badge swipe. He bypassed the doors somehow. Inside job, John muttered. They're watching every move. Later that night, Maya sat in her temporary office, exhausted. Her daughter was asleep at home under private guard. The flash drive sat beside her laptop, unopened. Her fingers hovered over it. She looked at John. Do you think we'll ever get all of it out? John leaned against the doorframe. I think if we don't try, we're no better than them. Maya clicked open the first file.
The screen flickered, then stabilized.
Names, settlements, confidential hospital incident logs. It was worse than they thought. She closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them again. No more shadows. It was time to bring everything into the light. The next morning, the city stirred beneath a veil of fog. John Walker sat alone in his private office before the rest of the building awoke. In front of him, the screen displayed everything Ethan had uncovered. Legal settlements, internal emails, manipulated safety certifications. It wasn't just a cover-up. It was a system long-running, deeply embedded. Edgewell had knowingly rebranded defective devices and continued distribution. Somewhere along the line, profits had become more valuable than human life. Paul entered, his face pale. We finished decrypting the final files. Ethan's drive had a trove of sealed court documents. Edgewell's lawyers negotiated over a dozen hush settlements. 3 of them involved deaths, all recent. John exhaled slowly, a hand covering his mouth. How much time before this reaches regulators? We'll push it today, but we need to be careful. There's enough in here to spark not just civil suits, but potential indictments. John nodded. And protection for Ethan. He's disappeared, Paul said grimly. Didn't show up at work this morning. Phone's off, his apartment's empty. John stood, his voice steady. Then we find him quietly. Meanwhile, Maya walked into the building with her head high, but her nerves tight as piano wire. She hadn't slept. The flash drive's contents haunted her. Every file was a life derailed or lost. Every email dripped with corporate indifference. She couldn't unsee it. In her office, a small package waited on her desk. No return label. No handwriting, just tape. Her hands hesitated before peeling it open. Inside, a single newspaper clipping yellowed and folded. It was an obituary. Her husband's. She froze. The date, the photo, even the church service were all correct, but someone had gone to the trouble to find it, print it, and send it anonymously. A silent reminder. A threat disguised as remembrance. Maya sat down, breathing slowly, deliberately. She wasn't afraid for herself, but they were getting closer, more invasive, more precise. She walked straight to John's office and laid the obituary before him. He read it without a word, then reached for the phone. Get security on Maya's home now. Double the rotation. No more watching from the curb. They stay on the door. John, she said softly. They're not trying to hurt me. Not physically. They want to unsettle me, discredit me, and they're getting better at it. That won't last, he replied. Because once this is public, it won't matter how much they rattle you. That afternoon, Linda Harris brought sobering news. The media is circling again, she said, placing her tablet on the desk. Word leaked that Edgewell might be under federal investigation. They're already preparing a statement claiming full cooperation. John narrowed his eyes. Let them. We'll time our release right after. No spin, no polish, just the evidence. Are you sure? Linda asked. This could destroy them. John looked at Maya. Then maybe it should. By evening everything was in motion. The files were packaged into a detailed dossier. A press release was prepared, concise, direct, irrefutable. The DOJ had already confirmed receipt of the initial documents. The New York Times had agreed to run the exposé once the second wave of files dropped, but the tension was rising. As Maya left the building that night, she noticed a car parked across the street. Same make, same color as the one that followed her a week ago. It didn't move, just sat there, lights off, windows tinted. She kept walking. At home, Joy met her with a tired smile. Mom, someone dropped this at the door. Said it was from church. Maya took the envelope. Inside was a typed letter. You still have time to stop. Walk away and the rest of your life will be untouched. No one else has to get involved. Not your daughter, not your memories. We know where they live, too. There was no signature. She folded the letter carefully, then called John. He didn't hesitate. Come to my place tonight. Bring Joy. It's secure. Off the grid. They won't reach you there. Maya hesitated. If I run, they win. No, John said, his voice low and full. If you fall, we all do. That night, Maya and her daughter stayed in a secured guest apartment in a private complex owned quietly by the Walker family. Joy played with a puzzle on the coffee table while Maya stared out at the city skyline, holding a cup of tea that had long gone cold. In her hand was the letter. In her heart was fire. They think fear makes people quiet, she whispered to herself. But it's never fear that silences. It's forgetting what matters. The following morning, Maya stood in front of a mirror, straightened her blazer, and walked out the door with her daughter's kiss on her cheek.
Today was the day the truth was ready, and so was she. At precisely 9 a.m., the press release went live. The Walker MedTech website momentarily froze under the traffic surge. Social media erupted. The headline was simple but seismic. Walker MedTech confirms corporate malpractice by Edgewell Technologies. Evidence of ongoing device rebranding and settlement suppression. Attached was the full dossier, internal documents, testimony, timelines, and data charts. It was unfiltered. No corporate jargon, no attempt to soften the truth. Just names, numbers, and the voices that had been silenced until now. John Walker stood at the head of the conference room, flanked by Paul, Linda, and Maya. Behind them, rows of reporters filled the seats. Cameras clicked, lenses adjusted, microphones lined the table. He stepped up to the podium. "Good morning. My name is John Walker, CEO of Walker MedTech. What we are releasing today is difficult, disturbing, and necessary. Our company was nearly a participant in a deal that would have endangered thousands of lives. We did not move forward. Instead, we moved toward the truth." Gasps murmured through the room. "I stand before you not as an executive, but as a human being who nearly failed to see the cost of silence. Today, we present our findings, evidence of suppressed safety violations, rebranded defective devices, and the systemic erasure of patient harm." A hand went up in the crowd. "Mr. Walker, who brought this to your attention?" John turned to the side and with a nod invited Maya to the podium. She walked up slowly, her presence quiet but commanding. No makeup, no suit polished for press. Just the same calm strength she'd always carried. "My name is Maya Harris," she began. "I work at Walker MedTech. I used to clean its floors. And one day, I saw something I couldn't ignore." She paused, letting the silence hold. "I am not an engineer. I am not a doctor. I'm a widow. My husband died waiting for a device like the ones in those files. When I found records that didn't match, patterns that were hidden, I spoke up." Reporters leaned in. "I was told I didn't belong in boardrooms, that my job was to stay quiet. But I wasn't raised that way. My parents taught me that justice isn't just something you hope for. It's something you live for." Another hand rose. "Miss Harris, have you received threats?" Maya didn't flinch. "Yes." "Are you afraid?" She looked straight ahead. "I'm not afraid of truth. I'm afraid of what happens when good people pretend not to see." The room was still, and then came the claps, first scattered, then rising. Not from the reporters, but from Walker MedTech employees standing at the back. Engineers, receptionists, analysts, janitors, people who saw in her not a whistleblower, but a mirror. Backstage, John's phone buzzed. It was a direct line from the Department of Justice. He stepped aside and answered. A low voice said, "We've seen the files. We'll be opening a formal investigation into Edgewell. You'll be contacted for testimony." John closed his eyes briefly, then replied, "Understood. We're ready." After the press event, Maya sat in the green room sipping water. Her hands shook for the first time all day. "You did it," Linda said softly, sitting beside her. "You burned the lie down." "I lit the match," Maya replied. "But it was already soaked in gasoline." Paul stepped in next. "The public's on your side now. Stories are flooding in. Former Edgewell employees, doctors, patients, it's turning." Maya nodded. "Then we hold the line. We don't stop now." That evening, national news ran the segment. From Janitor to Justice, the story of Maya Harris. Footage of her speech, clips from the press release, and interviews with patients appeared on screens across the country. At home in Queens, Joy watched with her grandparents, her eyes wide, her chest swelling with pride. "That's Mommy," she whispered. The phone rang. It was the church. The pastor had watched the coverage. "We'd like to invite Maya to speak Sunday," he said. "There's power in her voice, and folks need to hear it." Back in the city, John sat in his office well past midnight, reviewing every name on the patient incident list. He didn't want to lose sight of the human cost behind the data. Then came a message from an anonymous email address. "You think this is over?" It's not. There's more than Edgewell. This rabbit hole runs deeper. Be careful who you trust. Attached, a single document, redacted, but traceable to a secondary device supplier in Boston. John leaned back, a chill creeping down his spine. Maya had cracked the dam, but the flood was only beginning. The document attached to the anonymous email was a single sheet of metadata from a manufacturing pipeline. At first glance, it seemed unremarkable, a supplier shipment report with parts, serials, and internal routing codes. But John's eyes caught a detail others might miss. A component listed as EXR7412 flagged in earlier Edgewell devices, the same defective sensor that had caused multiple fatalities. And the source, a company named Northbridge Components, based out of Boston. At dawn, John called an emergency meeting with Paul, Linda, and Maya. The team gathered in a secure boardroom. Coffee steamed on the table, but no one touched it. "This isn't just Edgewell," John began. "They got those faulty sensors from Northbridge. And according to our supply chain contracts, Northbridge also provides parts to 4 other companies." Paul frowned. "That means the risk is still active. The same flawed components might be out there in other devices." Linda tapped on her tablet. "I checked the supplier database. Northbridge is listed as an approved clean vendor by the FDA. No violations, no audits in the past 7 years. Because no one looked," Maya said quietly. "Or no one wanted to." They all knew what this meant. The scandal was bigger than Edgewell. It could sweep through the entire industry. But the deeper they reached, the darker the waters became. John decided to pay a visit to Northbridge himself. No calls, no notice, just presence. He and Paul flew to Boston on the company jet that evening. Maya stayed behind to keep pushing the Edgewell story with the media and regulators. When they arrived at the Northbridge facility the next morning, they were met by a lean man in a slate gray suit who introduced himself as Victor Lang, VP of Operations. Victor greeted them politely, but without warmth. "We weren't expecting visitors, Mr. Walker." "I like to see things with my own eyes," John replied. "It's how I avoid surprises." Victor forced a smile. "Our doors are always open to partners." Inside, the facility was sterile and humming. Technicians moved quietly between machines. But John noticed certain sections were unusually empty, rows of shelved equipment, supposedly under maintenance, and several computers oddly shut down during peak work hours. He asked to see QA reports. Victor hesitated, then provided files, but they were scrubbed clean. Not a single flagged component in 6 months. Unlikely, impossible. On the flight home, Paul turned to John. "They're hiding something, and they're more prepared for us than Edgewell was." "We need someone inside," John said. "A second Ethan." Back in New York, Maya was fielding back-to-back media inquiries and regulatory follow-ups. The DOJ had scheduled initial hearings with both her and John, but something else was pulling at her. Ethan was still missing. Late that night, she received a text from an unknown number. "You're looking in the wrong direction. Follow the money trail from Northbridge's legal fund. Ask for Sheldon Pierce." She forwarded the message to John. The next morning, John met Maya in the rooftop garden above Walker Medtech. It was one of the few quiet places left untouched by the storm. "Sheldon Pierce," he said, flipping through records on his tablet. "Former Edgewell legal strategist, now a consultant for Northbridge. No public listing, but he's tied to a shadow lobbying firm based in D.C. They're protecting the pipeline," Maya said. "The same way Edgewell protected their brand. It's not just faulty parts. They built systems to absorb damage, pay off victims, silence engineers, dodge audits." John nodded. "And we're going to dismantle it piece by piece." They formed a plan. Approach Sheldon indirectly through a former colleague who owed Linda a favor. Get him to talk or at least flinch. At the same time, Maya and Charles Green, now leading a special ethics unit, would begin mapping out all device manufacturers using Northbridge parts.
2 days later, Linda met Sheldon Pierce at a private club in Midtown.
The conversation was casual until she slid a photo across the table. A child, age 9, who had died when his implanted monitor shorted during a soccer game.
The part traced back to EXR 7412. Who signed the indemnity clause? Linda asked quietly.
Sheldon didn't answer, but his hand trembled. Your signature's on the internal risk memo, she said.
You knew. You buried it.
Still no reply, but his silence was enough. Back at headquarters, Maya stared at a wall now covered with names, companies, parts, and payment trails.
A map of truth, painful and massive. She looked at John. We're not fighting a company anymore. John nodded solemnly. We're fighting a culture.
A storm was coming bigger than either of them imagined, and they would face it together. Within 72 hours of Linda's meeting with Sheldon Pierce, whispers started echoing through corporate hallways, legal circles, and Washington backrooms.
Someone had talked, if not Sheldon himself, then someone close enough to feel the heat.
A senator from Massachusetts called a surprise subcommittee meeting.
The New York Times published a second exposé.
This time not just about Edgewell, but naming Northbridge and suggesting a multi-company span nearly a decade.
Maya watched the televised hearing from the security room in Walker Medtech.
Arms crossed, jaw clenched. Victims' families were testifying, now ordinary people from small towns and big cities, each with the same heartbreak behind their words. A man from Texas who lost his wife after a heart implant failed during routine exercise.
A mother from Detroit whose son had collapsed mid-basketball game. All linked to the same component. The wave was cresting. Back in John's office, Charles Green laid a folder on the table.
Internal audit traced Northbridge's legal fund disbursements. Millions have been quietly routed to shell firms, many tied to lobbying arms or hush settlements.
Several paid out within weeks of adverse device incidents. John flipped through the documents. Which firms? 3 major ones. All with links to politicians who previously blocked stricter FDA oversight on implants. Paul leaned against the wall. This isn't just medical corruption. It's political protection. That's why the system never held. Mia walked in just as he finished. Then we go public again. John looked up at her. We just dropped a nuclear story. This will be war. Mia didn't blink.
Then we fight like people who've already buried too many loved ones. That night, John and Maya sat down for an exclusive primetime interview on national television.
The set was clean, softly lit, framed with photos of patients, not logos. The anchor opened with gravity.
Tonight, we bring you the deeper truth, not just about one company, but about a system that let greed override ethics.
And we bring you the voices behind the reckoning. John spoke first, calm and direct.
We've discovered that faulty components, knowingly distributed, were hidden through a network of legal deception and regulatory evasion.
This is bigger than Edgewell.
It touches companies across the medical tech sector. Then Maya spoke, her voice unwavering. What began as a warning on a cleaning cart has become a movement for justice.
People deserve transparency.
People deserve to live without wondering if the device in their chest was a corporate gamble.
Phones across the country lit up. News feeds exploded. By morning, regulators had launched formal investigations into 2 additional companies. Northbridge stock plummeted 23% in one day.
Congressional hearings were fast-tracked, and for the first time, senior FDA officials admitted on record that the industry's self-policing practices had failed.
But retaliation also escalated.
John received a threatening email with personal photos taken without his knowledge of his home, his daughter's school, his late wife's grave.
Maya's building was graffitied in red spray paint. Truth kills jobs.
Joy was pulled aside at school and asked questions by a man claiming to be with school security, a man the administration couldn't later identify. Paul immediately installed round-the-clock protection for both families, but the message was clear.
Someone had been exposed and they were lashing out. Linda met with John the next morning. There's chatter that a multinational holding company is pulling strings behind the component chain. They own equity in Northbridge and several other suppliers. The shell trail leads to Luxembourg. John exhaled. This wasn't negligence. It was deliberate, strategic. Can we trace the funding back to board members or elected officials? Maya asked. We're working on it, Linda said. But it's a maze. John stood. Then we go louder. We name names, push hearings, subpoena everything. We make it impossible to ignore. As the week unfolded, a new player emerged, an anonymous former executive from Northbridge. Using the alias Allen, he leaked documents to a watchdog nonprofit, showing internal memos that not only acknowledged the sensor defects, but also advised how to manipulate regulatory compliance testing. The phrase that caught everyone's eye, "build to pass, not to last." That line alone made headlines overnight. Build to pass trended on every major platform. The DOJ formally widened their probe into medical tech supply chains. The president issued a statement promising reform. And yet, amidst the chaos, Maya found herself staring one night at a simple drawing her daughter had taped to the fridge of a heart with the words, "For the people you help." Tears filled her eyes. Not from fear, but from knowing that somewhere a family was watching the news, realizing their pain had a voice now, and that voice wouldn't be silenced. The morning of the congressional testimony arrived with an eerie stillness. Outside the Capitol, the steps were flanked by rows of media vans, cameras glinting under the rising sun. Reporters rehearsed their segments while police stood at the ready. The gravity of what was about to unfold hung in the air like the promise of a storm. Inside the building, Maya adjusted the collar of her navy blue blazer in the mirror of the witness waiting room. Her hands, once roughened by years of scrubbing floors, now held the weight of public trust. She wasn't just a whistleblower anymore. She had become the moral pulse of a national reckoning. John entered the room, his expression solemn but resolute. "Are you ready?" Maya turned toward him and gave a small nod. "As I'll ever be." Paul appeared in the doorway, a folder tucked beneath his arm. "Final prep notes. They're going to try to rattle you. Especially Senator Keeney. He's received campaign funds from two of the companies tied to Northbridge." "I'm not here to please them," Mia said. "I'm here to speak for the people they forgot." An aide appeared. "They're ready for you." Mia stepped into the hearing chamber and was immediately struck by the grandeur, wood-paneled walls, high-arched ceilings, the buzz of whispered conversations. She took her seat at the long table, cameras flashing as her nameplate was placed before her. Senator Patricia Langford, the chairwoman, gave the room into order. "We convene today to hear testimony regarding the widespread concealment of defective medical devices, supply chain malpractice, and the resulting loss of human life." One by one, testimonies unfolded, experts, former employees, grieving families. Then came Maya's turn. She stood slowly, adjusted the microphone, and looked out at the sea of faces. "My name is Maya Harris," she began. "For most of my life, I cleaned up after other people. I swept floors, emptied trash. I saw what others overlooked because no one ever thought I mattered enough to lie to." A hushed stillness filled the room. "One day, I found records that didn't add up. Not just missing numbers, but patterns of silence. People were dying, and the companies responsible weren't fixing the problem. They were hiding it, rebranding it, profiting from it." Senator Keene leaned forward, fingers steepled. "Miss Harris, are you suggesting a systemic conspiracy between multiple corporations and regulators?" "I'm not suggesting anything," she said firmly. "I'm stating what your own documents confirm. People inside these companies made choices to silence engineers, to pay off grieving families, to suppress truth in the name of quarterly gains." He smirked slightly. "And how can we be certain your interpretation isn't colored by personal bias? You lost someone, didn't you?" Maya looked him dead in the eye. "Yes, I lost my husband. And that grief taught me to tell the difference between accident and betrayal. What happened here? What continues to happen is betrayal. Senator Langford interjected. Let the witness finish. Maya leaned forward. I'm not here because I want revenge. I'm here because people like my husband, like that little boy from Texas, like the woman from Detroit, they deserve someone who didn't walk away, someone who didn't stay silent just to keep a paycheck. Applause rose, quickly silenced by the gavel. After the hearing, Maya stepped out into the sunlight, overwhelmed by a crowd of supporters, activists, reporters, strangers who now knew her name. One woman reached through the barricade and pressed a hand to Mia's arm. My son's monitor came from one of those companies. I pulled him out of surgery after your story. You probably saved him. Maya's eyes brimmed with tears. She nodded silently, unable to speak. Back at Walker MedTech, John watched the live stream from his office. Charles sat beside him, shaking his head in awe. She just moved the nation, Charles said. John didn't reply. He was reading a report that had come in during the hearing. Northbridge's headquarters had been raided by federal agents. Multiple executives were taken in for questioning. International regulators had launched their own probes, and Sheldon Pierce, the once silent consultant, had agreed to testify under immunity. That night, John visited Maya at her apartment. They sat on the stoop, the city humming quietly around them. We crossed the threshold, he said. There's no going back now. Maya looked up at the stars just beginning to pierce the sky. Good, because back there was broken. He smiled. You did something impossible. No, she said softly. I just stopped pretending I was invisible. They sat in companionable silence as Joy peeked through the window and waved. Maya waved back. Tomorrow more hearings would come. More files, more resistance. But tonight, they rested because for the first time the world was listening. Spring arrived in New York quietly with soft breezes and longer light. On the front steps of Walker MedTech's headquarters, a new bronze plaque had been installed with the names of patients affected by faulty medical devices. Beneath the names were 5 simple words. Truth is the loudest legacy. Maya stood in front of it one morning, her hand brushing the cold metal. She traced the name of her late husband, the curves of the letters familiar like the pages of a journal she once wrote in every night. Behind her, footsteps approached. You ready? John asked. She turned and smiled. As I'll ever be. They walked inside together. A town hall had been scheduled for that afternoon. Employees from every department were gathered to hear the results of the past 6 months. For some, it was closure. For others, a new beginning. In the main auditorium, Maya stood before a packed crowd. She wore no microphone this time. She didn't need it. I used to walk these halls with a mop and a cart, she began, voice steady. Back then, I knew the sound of every floorboard, the quiet of every after-hours hallway. I wasn't supposed to ask questions, but I did. She paused, looking out at the faces. Young engineers, seasoned accountants, janitors, interns, department heads, all of them waiting. I asked because something didn't feel right. And once you see the cracks, you can't unsee them. What followed was a battle none of us chose, but all of us were called into. Some resisted, some stood tall, and many of you helped when no one was watching. She smiled gently. This isn't the end of a story. It's the beginning of a better one. Applause swelled, not thunderous, but deep and full. The kind of applause that means more than approval. It meant belief. Later that day, Maya was approached by a group of new hires. One of them, a shy woman in her early 20s, said, Miss Harris, my mom had a device replaced last year. One of the safe ones. You probably saved her life. I just wanted you to know. Maya blinked back tears. Thank you. That means everything. Meanwhile, in Washington, charges were filed. Executives from Edgewell and Northbridge faced indictments for fraud, negligence, and obstruction. A bipartisan medical oversight bill inspired by Mia's testimony passed the Senate. It required independent third-party testing for all life-critical components. For the first time in decades, the FDA's oversight powers were strengthened.
Sheldon Pierce, in an unexpected act of remorse, donated a large portion of his consulting income to a non-profit fund for device-affected families. Charles Green's ethics task force grew from a temporary unit into a permanent arm of Walker MedTech, mandated to review internal practices quarterly and train new employees on integrity-based decision-making.
And Maya, she didn't return to cleaning floors. She was promoted to Director of Corporate Accountability.
Her office still faced the back of the building where sunlight filtered through ivy-covered walls, but it was hers. No longer a space of silence, but one where people came when they needed to remember what truth felt like.
Joy flourished, too.
With the storm behind them, she returned to school with confidence. One evening, she brought home a drawing, a picture of Maya wearing a superhero cape, standing in front of the Capitol.
"You're famous now, Mama," Joy said, grinning. Maya laughed. "Famous is for people who want attention.
I just wanted the lies to stop."
Weeks later, Maya received a letter handwritten from Ethan. He was safe in hiding, but safe. The letter was brief but heartfelt.
He thanked her for her courage and said simply, "You reminded me who I was." She folded the letter carefully and placed it in her desk drawer beside a photograph of her husband and daughter and the first memo she had ever found, the one that started it all. On the one-year anniversary of the hearing, a memorial vigil was held in Central Park for the lives lost.
Maya was invited to speak. She didn't bring a speech. Instead, she stood before the crowd, surrounded by candlelight and silence, and said, "We cannot bring back what was taken. But we can honor it not with noise, but with action, with systems that see, with leaders who listen, with the courage to speak, even when the room tries to drown you out." A candle flickered in her hand. "I was once told I didn't belong in the room, so I built a room where everyone belongs." That night, the stars above New York gleamed softly. And somewhere in the crowd, someone decided not to stay silent. Because of Maya Harris. Because of the janitor who shook a nation. Subscribe to BUP Stories for more inspiring stories like this.